Hey guys, what's going on? I'm going to talk a little bit about a very common objection I hear, right? So when you're signing people up, you can get to the last stage, and then they can be like, "Oh, there's $100 sign up. I didn't know that it costs $100, right?" And basically, the way I explain it is we're just paying for the marketing rights to all the products that we're allowed to sell, right? Because being able to sell all these products and basically name drop on these brand names, it's like really powerful. It lends so much credibility to the business and to the team that it's worth $100 for us to basically be allowed to sell these products in like so many different countries, right? So that's basically how I handle that objection, right? The other thing is about dreams, right? So if you don't write your dreams down, if you don't think about your dreams, then they don't really exist, right? And they never will, because everything you see around you and everything that is out there in the world was always a dream before it was a reality, right? Because things don't just pop into existence, right? They need to be designed, they need to be thought out, they need to be planned, and then they need to be created, right? So they don't just pop into existence. And your dreams are going to be exactly the same, right? If you don't like think about them, plan them, design them, and then create them through little like smaller steps, then they're never going to exist. They're never just going to pop into existence, right? That's just not how life works, okay? So you need to write your dreams down. You need to revisit them at least once a year. But I do definitely recommend working on them like constantly, right? Because it doesn't matter if your dream list gets bigger as you progress in the business. All that matters is that you're crossing them off as you go, right? So it doesn't matter how many you add. It's good to add more. You want to have an even bigger dreams list, but you also want to be crossing some off, right? And the business can definitely help you do that, right? So basically, when you look at the wealthy and you look at the poor, the difference between them is generally how they spend their time, right? Because we all get given the same amount of time in like a week, in a year, maybe not necessarily in our lives, but like per week, we definitely get the same amount of time, right? So the difference between the wealthy and the poor, the wealthy and the broke, are basically how we spend that time, which like it should be reassuring to all of you guys out there because that means that it's all comes down to habits, behaviors, and actions, right? Which like that's one of the few things we actually have control of, right? It's our actions and our attitudes. That's all we have control of. And if the difference between you and a wealthy person is just your actions, then you're the only one that has control over that, right? And that means that you can change your financial position in life, right? Because nobody really becomes successful and wealthy by accident, right? Even like people that win the lottery, if they don't adjust their spending habits, because like as soon as we win the lottery, we're just like, oh, I'm a millionaire, I'm going to spend millions of dollars, right? If you don't like check yourself, basically, then you're just going to lose all that money again, and then you're probably going to go into debt because you still have the mindset of I'm a wealthy millionaire, right? So even the people that win the lottery, for them to be long-term successful, they need to have like a broke mindset, right? And they need to have some level of like financial intelligence, right? So nobody really gets successful or wealthy by accident, right? So the next thing I'll talk about is the lists, right? So when you're getting started in the business, you basically have three different lists, right? So you got the A list, which is family and close friends. Then you got your B list, which is like acquaintances, neighbors, everyone you know the name of, but that you don't necessarily have conversations with on a daily basis, right? And then your C list is basically the people you haven't met yet, right? So that's like obviously going to be the biggest list because there's a lot more people out there that we don't know that we do know, right? So when you've got your A list and your B list, but I'll talk more about the A list now, you want to finesse it, right? So basically what finessing the list means is you want to start with you want to basically group the names together in terms of who knows each other, right? And then you want to find the most influential person in each group, right? So if your uncle like Tom or whatever is like the really successful, intelligent guy in the family, and everyone usually kind of runs things by him before they make any like important financial or lifestyle decisions, then you want to finesse the list by talking to him first, right? And trying to get him on board. and basically having a one-on-one with him before you have that family meeting, right? Because if he's on board with it, it makes everything else so much easier, right? Because people are going to look to him to basically clarify whether or not they're making the right decision, and he's going to already be on board. So he's already going to be a positive influence, and a major positive influence at that, for like joining in the business, right? So that's kind of how you finesse the list. But if Uncle Tom or whatever says no and he's not interested, then you just go to the second most influential, right? And then the third most, and then the fourth most. And then hopefully you got the first most influential, but if you didn't, you just keep on working down, right? And by doing that, you're kind of rigging the list in your favor, right? You're kind of rigging the list in your favor, basically, okay? And when you're doing these phone calls to invite the not as influential people to the family meeting, you basically want to give as little info as possible, right? So I always do this by first off stating that I'm like in a rush, right? I don't have a lot of time to talk. So I basically just try and clear the night for tomorrow night. Whether or not they're available, I book it. If they're not available, I'll just say, okay, well, I'll call you back because this is really important. And yeah, if you can't reschedule, then I'll just call you back later, right? You don't really want to answer any questions over the phone for two reasons, right? So one thing I've noticed is that when you answer one question, you're kind of committing to answer like a whole line of questions, right? So if you answer one, then you have to answer a second, then you have to answer a third, right? And you're just not going to be able to give them the whole picture over the phone, right? So you just don't want to start or even open that can of worms, right? The second reason that you don't want to answer questions over the phone is because once you finish talking to one family member, they're gonna go and call the next and be like, "Hey, have you talked to James? He's got something going on tomorrow night. Did you get a call from him?" And if you've answered any questions, they're gonna be putting together little bits and pieces, right? They're gonna be putting little bits and pieces that you've basically given them together with each family member, and they're gonna get some like distorted puzzle that just doesn't make sense, right? So they're gonna see that distorted puzzle, and they're gonna come in with their own preconceptions to the meeting about what the thing you're basically offering them is, right? And like we preach it a lot in the business, but preconceptions are obviously a very bad thing, right? Because if you're contacting, it leads to prejudice, which leads to less action. And if they're a prospect, it leads to them saying no to something they don't fully understand, right? So by giving them all the information at one go, at one meeting, you take control of what they find out about the business, right? So basically you want to, when you are like going through your list and stuff, you want to talk to both partners, right? And you don't ever want to thank a prospect, right? Because it sets the like subconscious precedent that they're doing you a favor, right? And it's basically important to keep your posture, because you're the one with the opportunity. You're the one with the cookie, right? So it's basically important for your posture in being their upline that you don't say thank you, right? They should say thank you to you because you're the one that's giving them a cookie, right? You're the one that's giving them a chance, right? And back to the call thing. So when they do ask questions, because they will ask questions, they always ask questions, right? So when they do ask questions, you basically just go, "That's a great question. I'll be answering that tomorrow night." And then you reconfirm. So you go, "I'll see you at 8:30 at your place. I'm looking forward to it, man. See you there." And if they keep on like going, just you established you're in a rush at the start, right? So you can just be like, "Hey man, that's a great question. I'm going to answer that tomorrow night. I promise you I will answer that tomorrow night. I'm really in a rush right now, man, but I will see you tomorrow at blah, 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 blah," right? So that's basically how you handle questions. Because yeah, you really don't want to give anyone any little bits and pieces, because if you give someone a bits and pieces, then you give someone else a little bit and piece. They're going to put it together, and they're going to basically say no before they even get in there because they think they know what it is, but they really don't, right? So the last thing I'll talk about is materials, right? So when you have the meeting, when you have the family meeting, you need to give out materials, CDs, brochures, stuff like that, right? Information about the business, right? Because interested people are always going to have more questions, Okay, they just are. They're interested, but they're not committed yet because they need to know more about what they're getting into, right? So interested people are always going to have questions. And if you haven't given out materials to them and information to them, then they're going to look to other people and the internet for answers to those questions, basically, right? And that kind of takes things out of our control, right? Because there's a lot of opinion out there, right? And opinion isn't necessarily good when you're dealing with this business because people don't actually understand what the business is. So they're not going to have an informed opinion, right? And all the people that do have an informed opinion, they usually back it up in fact, right? So it's usually like good. It's usually positive, right? So by giving out materials, you control their perceptions of what the business is and what the business isn't. And it also allows you to book the follow-up to get the materials back, right? So if you give materials out one night, it basically lets you book the follow-up. I'll be back on Tuesday to pick those up from you. Let me know what you think. And it basically just gives you a reason to see them again and follow up with them, right? And yeah, so that's everything for tonight, guys.